Most of what we are looking to accomplish is enabling local cultures to feed themselves. The U.S. doesn't need to lead that. The idea that we can come in from the outside and tell you what you should be doing versus you being able to figure out what that is locally, with us supporting what that is really the value that we bring, and it's also core to what we believe and how important it is for that to be owned, managed, and lived locally. And we could be used as a part of the resource in terms of what could help, but we definitely do not want to create dependence.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 71, and my guest is Tré Cates. He is the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Financial Officer of the Savory Institute. I had the privilege of getting to know Tré and a lot of the Savory Institute folks in Zimbabwe last year. They are committed to holistic management. That is, having all of us live in such a way that it benefits the land, animals, and our community. Talking to Tré today, we'll all learn more about the holistic management approach, the difference it's making around the world, and how we ourselves can make choices that can make a positive difference beyond organic. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to thank our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported in part by Just Thrive Probiotics. Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant, the probiotic everyone's talking about. Go to thriveprobiotic.com. And listeners like you, the Weston A. Price Foundation really is member-supported. If you are loving this podcast, please just go to the website and give a gift of any size. It helps us stay on the air and continue getting this life-giving and health-preserving information out there. Thank you so much. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Tré.
Thank you, Hilda. I'm glad to be here.
So you just had a regular life before you got into all this, right?
Yeah, actually it had nothing to do with agriculture or food, indigenous cultures, was a tech entrepreneur and began to transition looking for something that was far more meaningful. And out of what I would call a divine connection, ended up making and building a relationship with some board members of the Savory Institute, and voila, that was almost 6 years ago.
So, you weren't interested in agriculture or food per se. So what did they say? How did they influence you?
My expertise is working and building great and efficient organizations and building great teams. And so we were connected by me being able to maybe help in addressing the strategy and the direction of the Savory Institute and just help facilitate some conversations around it. Really is really where it started. As I became aware of the vision and of the dreams of the Savory Institute, I fell in love. I mean, it was a real life-changing moment for me.
Oh my gosh. Well, it has been for me too. I've only been here 3 days, but I'm like, this is fantastic. You feel like you've stumbled upon gold, a way that's holistic to approach revitalizing the land that's good for people and animals. It's just amazing, isn't it?
It's absolutely amazing. And knowing deeper in holistic management is the ability to be more aware of how holistic the world is in terms of how it operates. And so it applies to your family, it applies to your business, it applies to relationships, and it just happens to have an incredible, great impact on the environment.
You know, that's what Alan was saying, too. He was saying you can apply this if you're a single mom living in the city, right, this approach. Help us understand it in simple terms. How do you see holistic management applying to our lives day to day?
Yeah, it's the first thing is awareness. It's recognizing that everything is interrelated with everything else. And when people begin to recognize that as a part of the natural order of things, it changes how you make decisions, because you know that if I'm going to purchase this food, why am I purchasing this food, and what does that mean down the supply chain? So good food isn't necessarily just based on how it tastes. It's where it comes from, and it's why it has come from there, and all the things that go with that. So for me and everybody around us, we begin to recognize and become more aware of that connectedness, and then realize that how then do we participate in making decisions that enhance the life that we want versus focusing on the things that are more want-oriented. And so that to me is just kind of the basics. And so for people who are in urban areas, we encourage them to make better decisions about how they buy food, because it impacts those people who are, in essence, rearing, if it's animals or growing vegetables or whatever it is, and that influences everybody in their way of life, because we all eat.
Well, going back to our perspective on everyday purchases too, I never thought coming here would challenge, like, should I buy earrings or not? But the way Alan puts it and the way you just put it is, I have to think first, how do I want to live my life? And then I need to consider every step I take and decision I make, it's either one step closer to that or one step away.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even deeper, because your decision isn't just about the life you want, but it significantly impacts somebody else's life, right? And so for us, it's recognizing that interrelatedness and wondering how we then begin to make decisions as a community or as a culture, if it's in the U.S. or it's here in Zimbabwe. But for all of us, it's being aware and then saying to ourselves, now how do we make decisions that can enhance the environments for future generations? Because I want my children or my children's children to experience a life that's truly regenerative, that is producing far more than what we need, but it's doing it out of a commitment to it versus something that is accidental. So.
And I actually feel like in the U.S., people are trying to live more this way, not just because of the slow food movement and what have you, and interest in sustainable and organic, but people are thinking about, where did this T-shirt get made? And was it made in some place that takes advantage of child labor, for example?
Sure.
So this way of thinking is not too foreign.
No, and that's why the first is awareness, and I think awareness is growing. And it's been quite remarkable to even see in the last 6 years that I've been involved, how much things have changed. And that has been amazing to be a part of that. But underneath that is the commitment to make the decisions that really will produce the outcomes that we want. And that is a whole nother level of discipline and passion and overall commitment. So those are the things that the Savory Institute, the Africa Center are really committed to, is changing the practice, not just creating awareness.
That sounds like the harder part.
It is. It is by far the harder part, and that's why the Savory Institute has decided to embark on this strategy of partnering with local organizations that are indigenous to the cultures that they're in, and being a source and a resource for those individuals or organizations to help support farmers or ranchers or communities that are looking to do something different, versus a Savory Institute or any other organization coming from the outside and saying, hey, this is how you should do things. We end up supporting the organizations that are already here. So the Savory Institute's first hub was the Africa Center, which we're here today, and they've been here since the early 80s. But they have the relationships. Now we support those relationships as they implement them on the ground.
And can you give an example of another hub somewhere in the world that's partnering with some local groups?
Yeah, so those hubs tend to be local groups. So as the Africa Center is here, we have a hub that's in Turkey. We have one that's in Sweden. We have one that's in South Africa, in Argentina and Chile. And we have all these are organizations that are already indigenous to the local population and culture. And so they already have relationships where they're supporting or working to support local cultures that are either farming or they're ranching or they're looking to produce healthy food from regenerating soils. And we want to support that. So our goal is to have 100 of these over the next 5 more years. And the intent is to have places all over the world where people can learn and they can collaborate and work together to solve local issues.
And tell me something, how is this beyond the sustainability or the permaculture movement? Explain to me how this holistic management works.
Yeah, and so Alan I'm not sure if he used this term, but sometimes he talks about beyond organic. It's the idea of beyond some of these programs. Really, I think at the heart of what we do is back to what we talked about earlier, and that is how things are so interconnected or related to one another. And in doing that and recognizing that what would happen if we were making truly holistic decisions is that there wouldn't be a situation where you would have to certify or verify that the practices are a certain thing, because they wouldn't be anything but that. So the idea of beyond is just how do we get back to that our soils are regenerating themselves? How do we get back to cultures that are regenerating themselves, where we don't need people to tell us that it actually is socially meaningful, or it is regenerative, or it is financially sustainable, but it is that because that's just the best way for it to be that. And so that's really where Alan's coming from when he says that. And a lot of the programs is pretty much trying to say, here's a stamp, or here is this kind of designation to differentiate from others that are not. But the fact is we want everything to be that which regenerates soils, regenerates the livelihoods that we all want. So
I think I know what you're saying. So, for example, you wouldn't need a T-shirt company to put sweatshop-free labor, because everybody's doing sweatshop-free labor, right?
That's exactly
That's
right.
our goal.
Right. And for instance, Alan will use this as an example. When we think about the cultures of the past, let's just say 10,000 years ago, and he says, so was it anything but organic? It didn't have fertilizers. It didn't have all the inputs, yet those cultures still struggled to create the outcomes that they wanted, and it was how they practiced agriculture, or how they practiced government, or how they practiced community. The fact that they didn't see everything interconnected, which tends to be an awareness thing, and it could be a thing of consciousness as well. As that begins to emerge, then everybody recognizes that, wow, when I make this decision here, it isn't in a vacuum. It impacts all these other decisions. And how do we then step back to form policies and build relationships, build organizations, build movements that see the power in its connectedness, but also recognize the unintended consequence when you don't pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Can you give some stories of communities that you've worked with where you've seen some of these things at play?
You know, I mean, obviously I know you have other examples of this, but being here in Zimbabwe and where I'm spending a lot of my time lately, there are so many communities right near here, less than 50 kilometers, that are living out this in a day-to-day basis. And there's one great story of a woman who, her husband died, and she was struggling to even have enough money to feed her children. When we came in with a program of showing how she could use livestock to regenerate her soils and to help her grow crops, she actually said, we caught this on tape, that it's like she has 6 husbands now. It's that much more in terms of profitable outcomes to her. She says she could have never imagined it to be anything different. And I remember sitting there almost with tears in my eyes, because I wanted to have cameras and everything else to just capture that moment. But there was many of us surrounded, and we just couldn't believe what she said when she told us it was like having 6 husbands. And she says, before I had one husband who would go out and make money and bring it back. Now it's like I have 6. And so to me, that's a story of how abundant things could be if you are managing for that least common denominator, which is the soils, which feed us all. And there, closely to her, it was a significant influence in her life.
But now that's not to say that these things happen overnight, because I understand it takes time, right?
Yeah, it does. And sometimes, depending upon how degraded the soil is, you know, it could be that you see some results very fast. And then in some instances, it may take 10 years before you see some results. In areas of where we integrate livestock into areas where people are cropping, we see results quicker because it's an intensification of the manure and the urine in an area. And so in that situation with that woman, she saw those results within 3 years. And that's pretty substantial in a community where, average income is, less than a couple of dollars a day. And so it was significant where she was able to get 3 to 5 times the typical yield that she would get on the crops, where everybody else around here was getting this normal, and she was getting this just because she learned the symbiotic relationship between animals, herbivores, and the soils that they live on.
And I imagine the community got jazzed up about this too, right?
Super excited. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it wasn't. Her story was one that was very meaningful because she was using an analogy that we all just were so dumbfounded at how significant it was to her. But for every one person that shared a story like that, there were 10 others. So there's an incredible garden that didn't exist before this, that now they are now making enough food in the garden to feed other communities around them during the growing season, where they couldn't even feed themselves. Now they're feeding themselves plus. So all that came from recognizing the power of using these animals, planning that opportunity, and then continuing to execute.
Coming up, we'll learn the 3 key aspects that make up the holistic management approach. And now we want to pause and thank our sponsors, Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Most probiotic pills just pass through the system without achieving the desired effect. Microbiologist Kiran Krishnan, whom I interviewed just on episode 69 a few weeks ago, recommends a spore-based probiotic like Just Thrive. Just Thrive is the 100% spore-forming probiotic that arrives alive in the intestines naturally. It supports optimal gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. It's great for adults, kids, the whole family. The probiotic everyone's talking about, Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Visit their website at thriveprobiotic.com. And listeners like you, Even This Name Is Taken, said this on iTunes. I've been listening since episode 1 and encourage everyone to listen. I really like the episode with the Maasai in Africa, episode 29. But actually, I really like all of them. Thank you so much for this review, Even This Name Is Taken. I like that name, by the way. Hey, everybody, please follow this listener's example and give us a review on iTunes. We'd love to hit 100 ratings and reviews before the end of the month. And right now, we're at about 73. And thanks. Okay, Tré, so a minute ago we were talking about how the community got encouraged and was producing in abundance. That reminds me, I think that's a neat aspect of the holistic management approach, is that you're not just looking at the land and the animals, but you're really trying to collaborate with the community as a whole, right? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, for us, the Savory Institute approaches it where we put as much emphasis on all 3 aspects of what we consider to be holistic. One is the environment and everything about what we live in. 2 is the social, and 3 is the financial piece. We need all 3 for it to be able to be something that truly can sustain beyond the current conditions that we see in our world today. So we're looking for financial viability, we're looking for social meaningful activities from a community standpoint, and we're looking for that soil to be regenerative. That really is holistic. In the past, most funding or nonprofit work or NGO work has been program or time-based funding. So 3 to 5 years you come in and with a whole host of resources, including money, and when those resources and money dried up, everything was pulled back out. And so what was left in the community was not something that would last. It was temporary at best, and a lot of communities in Africa got used to that kind of activity. The problem is it left a big hole, not just in the community, in the hearts of the people who were like, so is this something you're doing because you've got money, or is this something you're doing because you're truly committed to seeing change in the community or on the ground? And so that's why for us, we chose to partner with local organizations that were not coming and going. They didn't have outfits or offices all over the world. their only focus was right there, right with those people, and trying to make a real difference. We didn't have to worry about them coming and then leaving. We didn't have to worry about them typically running out of money. What we had to worry about was how could we partner with them in a way to help them enable the best outcomes on the ground. And that's what excited us about kind of what our strategy is. And we may get more involved in some projects than others, but that is on a case-by-case basis, and it's done with enormous respect for that local culture and those indigenous people. The last thing we want is a U.S.-based organization with money coming in and telling you what you should do. We're the last people you actually should be listening to from that standpoint. What we want to do is enable those who are actually touching those lives and doing something on the ground. And if we can do that 100 times over, then we know we'll increase the likelihood of real impact globally.
The people that live in the community anyway are going to know the land best. They're going to know how their community operates. An outsider coming in giving tips on something, may be completely well-intentioned but lead us down the wrong path, right?
Correct. And that's it. I mean, when you look at all the funding, from donations to grants to philanthropic funds from large corporations, global corporations, of course they're all well-intended. Everybody hopes those funds go to create the best possible outcomes. But I think we all have to be honest. If they really created the best possible outcomes, why does it seem as if it's worse off today than it was 30 years ago or 50 years ago? Something's not right. Something's not working. And I think a lot of it goes back to what Alan was talking about, which is we tend to operate in silos. We tend to operate in these specialized ideas of how we should do livestock or how we should do seeds and soils or how we should do this versus that, versus recognizing that all of those things are so interconnected, we have to be addressing them all at once. Mm-hmm. And when we have visibility of all of that, then what outcomes we get are far better because we're managing for those outcomes versus one specific outcome. You bring someone here who is an incredible expert on livestock or cattle, but doesn't understand land and fertility. Those two have to work hand in hand with one another. Uh-huh. And without it, you aren't going to get the results you want. You'll get one at times working against the other versus working with one another.
Wow, this concept is amazing. It's convinced me. It sounds like a wonderful approach, but do you have detractors?
We do. I mean, the typical idea of livestock with land is if you want to heal that land, you need to reduce the number of animals. So as has been on Alan's TED Talk, what most see as that which destroys an animal is actually that which saves and heals. And so we advocate for more animals. We advocate for more intensity of those animals on the soils versus allowing them to just migrate as they please. So for us, that is a big, significant switch, both in the U.S. in particular, and that which is adopting policy from the U.S. that's 50 years in the rears. So all of a sudden now you've got countries in Africa that are adopting the typical confined quarters for cattle now as the best possible strategy going forward. And we are now on the backside of that saying we are trying to change that in the United States. So for us, we recognize that there are some individuals, organizations that wouldn't necessarily support us, both from their view of the relationship between that animal and those soils or their financial benefit, depending upon what side of the spectrum they're on. But we recognize that despite those things existing, we know we've got to do what we think is the best decision for that community, best decision for those soils, best decision for future generations. And we see that symbiotic relationship that we just can't give up on.
Do you feel like these other organizations are so busy doing their own thing that they can't see what you're doing? I'm just wondering, shouldn't they just be able to kind of look across the cafeteria and see that your table is, teeming with good fruit and theirs is not?
Well, it's interesting. If you've watched a lot of our videos or Alan's TED Talk, you'll see a lot of the fence line of what on one side is being regenerating and what the other side is degrading as such. What's interesting is some of the relationships between the fence line are who have been neighbors for years. Just because abundance exists in one side doesn't mean somebody on the other side is going to see it. So what we do is just continue to live with the values that we believe are important. We hope that over time, just as there are people who are early adopters and late adopters in any type of paradigm shift, we recognize that we're probably still in the early stages of a lot of things that should be adopted by the masses. We are excited about how people's choices of food can influence in that faster. So when someone buys a grass-fed or finished steak or burger, we know that's because they have committed to that animal being on grass, which means for that grass to regenerate, or those soils to regenerate, they have to manage that land differently than it's been managed the last 50 years, especially in the United States. So to us, that excites us because now we've got a buyer, a consumer, a user now choosing to influence how maybe a farmer should practice. And the Savory Institute's about trying to influence and to create the awareness in those connections.
Well, it's interesting. I know whereof you speak because we're with the Weston A. Price Foundation, and we have been early adopters of ancient traditions, saying butter is good for you, fat is good for you. These traditional cultures were upholding amazing foods that are so nutrient dense and so wonderful. And yet science, in the 70s or 80s or 90s was saying the opposite.
Correct.
But now it's all coming back around. But what are we doing? We're keeping our head down. We're doing what we do and promoting foods that we know to be proven to be good for you, and so eventually people will come around, but you just wish sometimes it was a little bit quicker.
A lot quicker.
Yes.
We all would wish that. And as you've experienced at Weston Price and other organizations, the expectations of what that timetable is, nobody knows. We just are committed to the cause, despite what the timetable is, and recognize that over time we will believe that people will adopt better practices to regenerate soils, to create and to grow better food, and to regenerate communities. We need people on the land continuing to be good stewards.
Well, Tré, let's say somebody's listening just now and they think, I want to learn more about this. What resources would you point them to?
Well, first of all, I encourage you to go to the website, savory.global, and you can Google it or you can just type in savory.global. And there's places all over the world that you can get involved with if it's a hub, if it's in the United States or outside the United States. Plus, we have an enormous amount of resources online where people can download them and read. And you can also purchase Alan's book, which is a new book that he's going to come out probably in the next, by the fall, third edition of his current textbook. All good resources to understand more about Savory Institute, holistic management, and kind of what we're doing to create a movement.
I've heard that your site even has videos, like a video course that people could take, correct?
That's right. Yeah, so there are online courses you can take that give you what we call the foundations of holistic management that deal with the heart of what is holistic management. And so those videos exist both as a part of the course as well as separated from the course. We have our own YouTube channel that you can pull, I guess now probably tens of dozens of videos to be able to see different people practicing it all over the world.
Oh, fantastic. Well, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners before we close? I usually like to ask people, what is one thing you would suggest for the listener to do to improve their health or heal the land?
Yeah, I would just say be more aware. Be more aware of what you eat. Be more conscious of why you do what you do, and recognize that they all have consequences. The hope is that we begin to pay more and more attention to those things, which allows for us to create the future that you would want for your kids, that I would want for my kids, and that communities around the world would flourish. So that's what I would ask people to do.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time, Tré.
Thank you, Hilda.
My guest today was Tré Cates. To learn more about the Savory Institute, visit their website, savory.global, where you'll find all of the resources we just discussed. For highlights from this episode, including links to their site and Tré's TED Talk, go to westonaprice.org, click on the tab that says Blogs and Podcasts, and look for the show notes for episode 71. Hey, and a big shout out to Podcast Village, where they train, produce, and promote podcasts. They have offered invaluable support for this show. Check them out at podcastvillage.com. And thanks to interns Lynn Rosenthal and Olivia Stanforth for their help with show notes.
Have you been enjoying these podcasts? Have you benefited from them or from the resources on the website or local chapter meetings? If so, please become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's only $25 for students and seniors and $40 for a general membership. Your contribution is critical for the continued work of the foundation. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.